welcome to Artistic Adventures. We're continuing our wood sprite project today, and we're going to complete her hair with some accessories for her hair as well as the rest of her body. So let's get started. First of all, I wanted to make a little change to the costume. We finished this basically in another video, but I thought the white was just a little bit too plain, and so I wanted it to look like some leaves, some small leaves were sort of had fallen down on the white and clung to it as she walked through the forest. So I'm just taking little tiny leaf shapes of that lighter green material and just sort of scattering them over that white trailing material. And I just think it gives it a little more dimension and just like, to think that she has these little leaves clinging to her as she walks. And I only used one color for this because I didn't want it to overwhelm the beautiful train of leaves that we have coming down her back. So that's the first thing I wanted to do in this video, was just to get that part out of the way. And after I looked at the dress when we finished it, I just thought it needed a little bit extra. So there we have the little leaves added to the train. That wasn't really too hard to do or too time consuming. And you could add other things if you wanted, like if you wanted to add crystals or thing or make it a little more fantastic, you could, but I'm trying to keep this more natural. Now I'm taking this green stretchy material that we used for the tunic, and I'm cutting two pieces that I'm going to use to wrap around her wrist. I was trying to think of natural things to use as decorations, and one of the things I wanted to use is pine bark, but I don't want to glue it directly to her. So I'm cutting this a little bit larger than her wrist, so there's enough room to wrap it around and glue it. And then I'm going to take this pine bark from a tree in our yard, and I'm just going to pop off some thin strips of this in different, it's different shades of brown and sort of a dark brown and a reddish brown. And then I'm taking some little strands of Spanish moss that I bought at Michael's that has been colored green, and I'm gluing that to one part of this green material, and then I'm going to glue these pine bark wood strips over it. And then once all this is dry, I'm going to wrap it around her wrist. And the reason I'm doing it in strips is because I want to be able to wrap it around the wrist. And by doing it this way, I'll be able to bend the fabric, and the little pine bark pieces will just go with the fabric. All right, so I'm doing one for the other side of her as well. So she'll have one for each arm. And then we're going to set those aside to dry, and we'll come back a little later and place them on her arms. What We've got plenty to work on while we wait for the glue to dry. I actually feel like I spend about half of my life waiting for glue to dry, especially with these videos. All right, so here's our doll, and I've glued some of that Spanish moss just to the bottom of her foot, right at the ball of the foot. And after that dries, I'm going to come back and wrap it around her foot, and that's all I'm going to do for footwear because I feel like she'd be mostly barefooted. And now I'm going to take my small curling iron and just take little tiny strands of her hair and curl it all over. And then we're going to just give her sort of a messy hairdo, sort of reminiscent of our Bellatrix doll that we did. But I don't want her to be too finished looking. She's a wood sprite, and she's running through the woods and her hair is kind of messed up and it probably gets leaves and twigs caught in it and that sort of thing. So went off camera because it took me about an hour to put all these curls in. I did put a couple of strands of braided hair down at the base. I'm going to let those hang down. And now I'm going to take some of this thin green wire. I'm going to take 3 pieces and I'm going to braid it because I need something a little bit sturdy. And I thought this would be as close to, say, sort of a vine look as possible without, getting something that doesn't look so natural. So after I get 3 pieces the same length, I'll twist one end, and I'm very loosely braiding this. And I'm doing this because I want to be able to stick things into it to glue it later. I'm going to use this as her sort of a headband. And you can see I'm leaving gaps as I braid it, and you don't want to tug on it too much. You want to have those gaps and leaves holes for you to stick things through. And I'm just going to measure it around her head because basically I'm going to uh, just put it around and bend it together at the back. So I want to make sure it's long enough. And I have a bag that has a variety of small little flowers in it, and I just get those out, and I'm going to clip off some of those and use them. But first I'm going to take some more of this Spanish moss and I'm sticking it into one of the little gaps there with some glue on it and let that dry a minute. And then I'm just going to wrap the Spanish moss around this braided wire piece. So this is going to also be another way that we'll be able to stick flowers into it and glue it by using this Spanish moss. And you don't have to be, that neat about it. Uh, I like it that it's going to have strands sort of sticking out or hanging down or whatever. All right, so I've cut off these pieces of the flower into individual flowers, and now we have our headband that we've covered with Spanish moss. And now I'm just kind of messing her hair up a little bit, pulling some of the strands apart and pulling it up on top of her head, mostly in the front. I'm letting the back sort of trail down, using one of my small bob pins to hold it up at the top. Mostly it's going to be held by this headband, but I needed to kind of get it up there while I do it. And no real science to this, just arranging it the way I want it to look, how I think it looks good, and how I think she might wear it. She might just like pull her hair up and then have this braided vine around her head, and then the loose curls would kind of come out. And I took the bob pin out after I got it in there. And you can use a comb with a tail to tuck things in if you need to, and leave some strands. If you need more curls later on, you can always come back in with the curling iron and add some additional curls if you need to. So that's kind of the loose look that I'm looking for. And I'm taking glue on the ends of some of these flowers. This is actually kind of looks like little berries on the end of this one, and sticking them into that greenery. I know I'm probably getting some on the hair, but as I've told you before, I really feel like these dolls are artworks to me. They're not, you know, things that I'm going to play with and change clothes or whatever. So if it gets on the hair, that's not really a big deal as far as I'm concerned. If you really don't want to do that, you could do this headband off of the doll and then put it back on her and fasten it in the back. I'm using some twigs that I found out in my yard, some actual real twigs, and cutting those off. And I'm also going to be gluing those into this headpiece because I think it looks, more natural that she might use some of these as decoration. So just some little small thin twigs and doing the same thing, just gluing the base and sticking it into that green moss. No real rhyme or reason, just what I think looks good. And on the back, I'm putting a little bit bigger leaf. It's one of the silk leaves that came with the flowers because I just want to have something sort of different in the back hanging down. So I'm putting that green leaf up underneath the flowers there. And I'm continuing around on both sides adding flowers. And I did have a couple of other silk leaves that I added in too. However you want to do this. If you had like a small butterfly, that would look cute too. I didn't have one though. I just try to make one. So I'm putting a little bit of white flowers at the base there where that braid is, and then I'm putting one white flower down at the bottom where I tied a knot in the hair. And then I'm going to glue some of the moss up under the hair and wrap it around that loose strand in a minute after that dries. I'm taking this strand and putting some glue on the back, and I'm going to put that up on that big leaf that I put in the back and have that trail down. And then I'm going to also glue some flowers to that moss as it trails down her back. And a couple of flowers attached to that. And that's pretty much it for them. I'm going to wind that Spanish moss around that strand, and I'll just use the hair to tie it at the bottom, and then I'm going to glue a flower to the bottom of that as well. Because she likes flowers. She just likes to have flowers everywhere. And I'm just doing a little bit on the shoulder there, putting a little bit of flowers on those leaves that we stuck up on the shoulder, putting a little flower up there, and some of that moss to hang down. And now we're going to take those cuffs that we made out of the fabric with the pine bark, and we're going to put, see, I left one side with the fabric available to have the other side come across it and glued down on top of it. And then I'm just going to have to hold that for a minute. Actually, I ended up putting some saran around it to hold it because I wanted to go ahead and do the vines around her feet. And I'm just wrapping it around from where I glued it, and then I'll glue that last piece as it comes around to the other piece on her ankle. You could put some flowers on that too, but I'm sort of flowered out with her, I think. So here's how she looks with her cuffs on and her hair finished. That's how it looks from the back with the hair. And then there's the front view. I think it looks a lot better with those green leaves, don't you? And there's a side view from the right side. And here's the back with that beautiful leaves trailing down. I just really like the way this turned out with her hair and everything. And there's a view from the left. You can see the braids that I put in her hair. And then a final view of the front. So I think she turned out really beautiful. I'm really happy with her. So we have more to do with this project. I think she needs to have a staff with a crystal, sort of a magical crystal. So we're going to do that in the next video. And then we have some other things to do too. So subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Thanks and bye.